Hey, what's up, guys? Shifty here. Today I'm going to be talking about the difference between having a DPS cooldown that is a buff on yourself versus having a DPS cooldown that is a debuff on a target. And just, I want to give you some quick examples of what I mean. So, here we have the rogue ability, the assassination rogue ability, Vendetta. This is their 2-minute cooldown. And they mark an enemy for death for 20 seconds, increases in the damage that you do with auto attacks and abilities by 30%. So that is a debuff that you place on a target that increases your damage. And then the other ability, which is a buff, this is the Marksman Hunter cooldown. True Shot increases your haste by 40% and causes Arcane Shot and Multi-Shot to always apply Hunter's Mark. So these are the two categories: a buff and a debuff. And basically a TLDR for this video is that I think that cooldowns that are debuff based, so an ability like Vendetta, is inherently a little bit less powerful than a buff like True Shot. Now, that doesn't mean that every debuff ability is worse than a buff ability. But what I'm saying is that a debuff ability is a little bit harder to use. It's a little bit harder to get full damage out of, and it can be kind of annoying to switch to things with this kind of thing. So here, let me give you an example. So here I have Heroic Gul'dan pulled up, and I have specifically damage done to Empowered Eye of Gul'dan. So this is a ad that pops up that you want to kill very quickly, and they should die, within 10 seconds. They should die very quickly. And this is another thing that determines if a debuff is better than a buff is how long an ad lives. Now, let me give you two extremes, okay? If an ability does 1 million damage in 1 second, then it is very good, right? I mean, 1 million damage every second is very good. But if it does 1 million damage over the course of 1 minute, then it's not very good, right? So debuff time matters. And so let me give an example. So Vendetta lasts for 20 seconds. So if you're killing an ad and it lasts 20 seconds, that means you get full capacity out of Vendetta, right? You get full use out of it. Now, if you use Vendetta on a target that lives only for 5 seconds, then this ability is effectively cut in fourth of the effectiveness of it. Whereas if you have a buff like True Shot, you get full capacity at all times when it's up, right? Whether the ad is dead or alive, you get 40% haste, and your arcane and multi-shots always apply Hunter's Mark. And so for priority targets that die quickly, it is better to have a buff than a debuff, in my opinion. Now there's some exceptions. Now let me point out what I feel to be a very interesting cooldown, and that is Touch of Death. And I do main Windwalker, so I'm a little bit biased, and there might be another cooldown that you could kind of apply to how Touch of Death plays. But I'm just going to use Touch of Death because it's very straightforward. So basically, after 8 seconds, the target will take damage equal to 50% of your maximum health. Now, on my Windwalker, I have like 3.5 million health. I'm pretty geared. So my Touch of Death is going to do 1.75 million baseline damage to an ad that I use it on after 8 seconds. Now, something to note on Touch of Death is that it's not, every 1 second for 8 seconds it does X amount of damage. It's after 8 seconds it does a huge chunk of damage. So if I use it, it does 0 damage, 0 damage, 0 damage, 0 damage, and then at 8 seconds it does a big chunk of 1.75 million. And so this can be really good. This can be a really strong cooldown for killing ads, right? If it lives long enough. And that's coming back to my point of the time that a debuff has matters. right? The whole, if it lasts for a minute and it does 1 million damage, then it's not very good. But if it's 1 second over, if it does 1 million damage over 1 second, it's really good. That whole thing. So let me give you an example. If I'm over here and I'm attacking Eyes of Gul'dan, and my raid is playing pretty well, and they're switching to it, and they're getting good procs, they're getting good crits, they're getting, they're getting procs like Ice Lance procs, or, whatever, ability procs that do more damage instantly, then the ad is going to die quicker. Now, the problem is that if it dies before 8 seconds is up, and I use my cooldown, then I effectively used a 2-minute cooldown to do 0 damage. I didn't gain a buff. I didn't gain a buff that increased my haste. I didn't gain any kind of buff. And if it dies before 8 seconds, then I do 0 damage. And the thing that's kind of hard about this is that, well, let me just say that 90% of the time, this is not going to be an issue. 90% of the time, you're going to use Touch of Death. Actually, I'd even say 98% of the time, you're going to use Touch of Death. It's going to proc, and you're going to do your full damage, and everything's fine. Everything's cool. But though that 2% of the time where you are expecting an ad to die slower, but it dies very quickly, you basically just wasted a 2-minute cooldown. You just wasted your 2-minute cooldown, and so your damage is going to be comparably very low to what it should be. And this I mean, so these I'm looking at strictly cooldowns here. So I'm also going to pull up another page really quick. This is total damage done over the course of the fight, and I just quickly want to show you how a class does damage over the course of a fight. And I'm basically just looking at if it's direct damage, something like a Rising Sun Kick, or like a Mutilate, or like a Frostbolt, where it does instant damage, or whether it's a dot. So Windwalkers, that we don't really have any dots, so we're pretty front-loaded damage. Here, Assassination Rogue, and Venom is well, Envenom's kind of weird. It's kind of a dot and kind of instant ability, but one of their biggest damages right here. So 18% of his damage was Rupture, which is a dot. Kingsbane is kind of a dot. So Assassination Rogues are very dot based. So they struggle to switch the ads. So that's just like how their damage works. Enhancement Shamans, I feel like they're pretty front-loaded damage. They have things like Flame Shock, I think. I'm actually not 100% sure if they sell Flame Shock. But they're pretty front-loaded damage. And then you have like a Moonkin who has some hard-hitting abilities, but they also have dots like Moonfire, Sunfire. And then you have Fire Mages, which is, I'd say, pretty half and half as well. I mean, here 20% of the Fire Mage's damage was Ignite damage, which is a dot. Arcane Mage is pretty front-loaded damage, not really dot-based at all. Frost DK is a little bit debuff based, but they're mostly front-loaded. Ret Pally's front-loaded, Marksman's front-loaded, Mage is front-loaded. So I'm just showing you how these classes do damage, basically. And that matters because on things, so this is like damage. Here I have damage done to Empower Eye of Gul'dan. So we have the Ret Pally doing the most damage to them, and then you have myself here on my Windwalker. Then you have Dirtbag here. He has a lot of Star Surge damage, which is a decently hard-hitting ability. So what I'm trying to say is that you have your front-loaded DPS first, right? Pretty front-loaded, and then you kind of have like your Fire Mage kind of lower because a lot of his damage is Ignite damage, and so he can't just instantly switch to an ad and kill it because part of his damage is just dot based and he can't help it. And then you have here the Assassination Rogue, which is pretty low on damage. Now Chicane's kind of he's not the best example because a lot of times he just doesn't switch to ads. But that's because he's very debuff based. He's, in order to do his damage, he needs to Rupture it. And then if he feels like it's gonna live long enough, he's gonna vendetta it. He's gonna Kingsbane it. He might. The other assassination rogue ability is Vanish, which basically it empowers your next ability that you use to do like 50% more damage or whatever. And you use that on a rupture, so you use it so that your next dot does 50% more damage. And so this rogue he's basically decided that it's not it's not really worth him switching to ads, which personally I don't really agree with. I think he should still hit it. I think he should try to front load as much damage to it as he can. So that means he'd be using like Envenom, and I don't know if it's actually worth rupturing it. Maybe like a 1-point rupture. But what I'm trying to say is he doesn't value how much damage he can put into the ad before it dies, because all of his cooldowns are debuff based. So it's not like he can really debuff it, because it's gonna die so quick that it's not really worth it. If an ad dies in 5 seconds, but your debuff lasts 14 seconds, that means you lost 9 seconds of a cooldown, which is not ideal. So you're probably gonna opt not into doing it, unless it's a big issue, right? Unless it's so priority that it's just gonna 100% wipe you, and then you may just like suck up and take a hit on those 9 seconds that you lose. So that's kind of this is just kind of my opinion. I'm definitely like willing to change my opinion on some of these things, but I've played a decent amount, and I know how things play generally. And I know that people have complained that that sometimes it's hard for their class to switch to things. You say like a Shadow Priest. I haven't really talked about Shadow Priest at all because we didn't have one here in this raid. But like a Shadow Priest, I mean, they don't have very bursty front-loaded damage, and so for them to kill an ad very quickly is difficult. And so that I feel like that's, again, TLDR is that a debuff based cooldown is slightly disadvantaged. Now again, that doesn't mean that every debuff cooldown sucks, and that doesn't mean that every buff cooldown is the best. That's just not how it works. But I'm saying that generally, if I could choose, if you could, I actually just heard of a server that there's like a private server out that you basically get to pick like whatever talents you want out of like all the classes, and so you're basically just like a big mix of all these classes. And so if I was playing, I'd probably want to play with all buffs. I'd want to play with like True Shot, and I'd want to play with like Icy Veins and Combustion, and I'd want to play with like Metamorphosis on a Demon Hunter, and I'd want to play with those kinds of things, as opposed to playing with like a Touch of Death and like a Vendetta that just debuffs. Now another thing I just really quickly want to throw out there is that, again, buffs I feel like are inherently a little bit stronger because they can be used in AoE situations, right? Debuffs are, well, at least in the case of the ones that I've pulled up here, Touch of Death and Vendetta, they're single target debuffs. And so, you could True Shot ads. You could True Shot a group of ads and do very good damage. But if I Touch of Death a group of ads, it's very low damage, because it's only one out of all of the ads that are there that I'm doing, that my cooldown applies to. So that's basically it, guys. Again, if you think I'm full of crap, if you think I'm wrong, let me know. I'm willing to learn more about intimate details about how a class plays. And I acknowledge that I could be wrong on some of this. I acknowledge that I don't know exactly for sure how an Enhanced Shaman does their damage. Or like a Boomkin, or I don't know the exact play style of a Frost Mage. These are just like my best guesses of how I think these classes play. So let me know if I'm wrong in the comments. But thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.